They say silence can be deafening, but in some places, silence isn't empty. It's pregnant with echoes, with whispers of what once was, and what still lingers. Blackwood Asylum was one such place, a crumbling monument to sorrow where shadows never quite stayed put, and silence had a weight all its own. But high in the desolate, snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps, there exists a silence far more profound, far more ancient, and infinitely more terrifying. The silence of the Sanatorium du Sombre. And within its decaying walls, a particular silence, a chilling void, known only as the Silent Ward. Report from Sector Gamma, the Silent Ward. It's breathing. It's here. They're all gone. It knows my name. The darkness, it breathes. That chilling snippet, recovered from a forgotten archive, is just one of the many mysteries surrounding the Sanatorium du Sombre. For decades, whispers have circulated about its abrupt closure in the 1950s, the mass disappearances, and the local legends of a malevolent presence. Tonight, on Echoes of the Past, we aim to uncover the truth. My name is Elara, and with my team, we're venturing into the heart of that silence, to the place they called the Silent Ward. The journey itself was a descent into isolation, the narrow, winding roads of the Swiss Alps, usually bustling with tourists, were eerily deserted, swallowed by a thick, oppressive fog that clung to the mountainsides like a shroud. Our battered SUV, laden with equipment, crawled through the mist, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of nervous anticipation and forced camaraderie. Liam, my co-host and cameraman, was already adjusting his head-mounted camera, a nervous excitement dancing in his eyes. He lived for the thrill, for the viral moment, but beneath the bravado, I knew he respected the unknown. Across from him, Anya, our brilliant sound engineer and resident skeptic, meticulously checked the readings on her portable audio recorder, her brow furrowed in concentration. She believed in data, in logic, in anything that could be measured and explained. And then there was Jonas, our guide. A man of few words, his face etched with the harsh realities of mountain life, his eyes holding a deep, unsettling unease. He was from the nearby village, a place steeped in generations of local legends, and his family, I would soon learn, had a history with the sanatorium. He drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at the looming, unseen peaks, as if sensing the darkness that awaited us. We found him in a small, weathered pub, nestled in the valley below the sanatorium. Jonas. He was reluctant, his eyes clouded with a history he clearly wished to forget. But a hefty sum, and perhaps a flicker of curiosity, convinced him. He spoke of the sanatorium in hushed tones, of the sickness that lingered, not just the tuberculosis that once plagued its patients, but something else, something darker. He warned us, his voice a low rumble, that some places are best left undisturbed. Liam, ever the showman, tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about ghosts and ghouls, but Jonas's gaze remained fixed, unwavering. Anya, pragmatic as ever, asked about the best routes, the structural integrity of the building, the practicalities, but Jonas only spoke of the cold, a cold that seeped into your bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He spoke of the silence, a silence that wasn't empty, but full of whispers. I felt a shiver then, a premonition that this journey would be far more than just another episode for Echoes of the Past. The ascent was grueling. The air grew thin, biting, and the snow, pristine and untouched, stretched endlessly around us, reflecting the pale, indifferent light of the winter sky. The sanatorium emerged from the swirling mist, like a skeletal hand reaching from the earth. a colossal, Gothic structure of dark stone and shattered windows. Its once grand facade now a decaying testament to forgotten suffering. It was hauntingly beautiful, a frozen monument to despair. The silence here was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our boots and the ragged rhythm of our breathing. It was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, that made your own heartbeat sound like a drum. Liam, despite his usual bravado, was quieter. His camera held steady, capturing the oppressive grandeur of the place. Anya's equipment, usually humming with life, seemed subdued, almost hesitant. Jonas, his face grim, led the way, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape, as if expecting something to emerge from the swirling snow. As we approached the main entrance, a massive, ornate wooden door, a sudden gust of wind, cold and unnatural, swept through the valley, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible scent of antiseptic and decay. It was the smell of sickness, of death, clinging to the very stones of the sanatorium. We were here, at the threshold of the silent ward. Stepping inside the Sanatorium du Sombre was like entering a different dimension. The air was heavy, thick with dust and the pervasive scent of decay, a cloying sweetness that hinted at something long dead. Moonlight, fractured by broken windows, cast long, skeletal shadows across the once grand entrance hall. Rusted gurneys lay overturned, and medical equipment, looking more like instruments of torture, were scattered haphazardly. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper and cobweb-draped chandeliers. Anya's EMF meter, usually a steady companion, gave a low, almost imperceptible hum, nothing out of the ordinary yet. But the silence. It was different here. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a presence, a watchful, waiting entity. As we moved deeper, the subtle signs began. In the old reception area, a sudden, inexplicable draft swept through the room, chilling us to the bone despite the lack of open windows. Liam, ever the professional, shivered, commenting on the sudden cold snap. Anya's EMF meter flickered briefly, a tiny spike, then settled back to normal. She frowned, tapping the device, muttering about faulty wiring. But I felt it, a cold breath on my neck, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that brushed past my ear, like a sigh of despair. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping the empty space, asking if anyone else heard it. Liam shook his head, focused on his camera. Anya dismissed it as the wind, but her eyes darted nervously. Noah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly clutched his arms, shivering violently, his breath misting in the air. "It just got freezing in here," he whispered, his voice barely audible. As we navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the battery-powered lights on our helmets and cameras began to flicker erratically. Liam cursed under his breath, tapping his light, frustrated by the new batteries failing. Anya's equipment, previously just humming, now emitted a low, rhythmic beep, and the screen on her thermal camera was showing erratic bursts of cold energy, even in seemingly empty spaces. "The readings are unusual," she muttered, her voice tight, as if something is actively interfering with the sensors. From one of the darkened patient rooms, a faint, dragging sound was heard, like something heavy being pulled across a rough floor. It was distant, almost swallowed by the oppressive silence, but distinct enough to make us all freeze. Noah, eyes wide with terror, questioned the sound. Anya, trying to maintain her composure, suggested it could be old pipes or the building settling. But I was staring intently at the doorway of the room the sound came from, my face pale. "It wasn't settling," I whispered. "It was moving." The initial unease slowly morphed into a gnawing dread. The flickering lights became more frequent, plunging us into momentary darkness that felt far longer than it was. Each time the light returned, Noah flinched, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to materialize. As we navigated a particularly long, narrow corridor lined with empty patient rooms, Liam caught a glimpse of movement in his peripheral vision. A shadowy figure, tall and gaunt, seemed to glide across the doorway of a room at the far end. He whipped his head around, but it was gone. Just a trick of the light, he told himself. But his grip on his camera tightened. "Did you see that?" he whispered, more to himself than to us. We entered what appeared to be a common room, a large open space with overturned tables and chairs. In the center, a child's wooden block, surprisingly intact, lay on the dusty floor. I walked towards it, a melancholic expression on my face, drawn by an inexplicable sadness. As I reached out to touch it, the block suddenly, almost imperceptibly, rolled a few inches away from me. I recoiled, my eyes wide, my voice barely audible. "It moved," I stated, the words catching in my throat. Noah, who had been lagging behind, suddenly clutched his ears, his face contorted in pain. "Stop saying my name," he panicked, claiming he heard it right there. Liam and Anya rushed to him, confused, as there was nothing, no sound, no visible entity, but Noah was trembling, his eyes darting wildly around the room. He cried, tears welling in his eyes, insisting that they did, that it was a whisper right in his ear, saying his name. Anya tried to calm him, checking his vitals with a worried glance. Her equipment was going haywire now, the EMF meter screaming, the thermal camera showing a swirling vortex of cold energy around Noah. As we tried to reassure Noah, a series of distinct, disembodied voices began to emanate from the surrounding rooms. They were faint at first, then grew louder, a cacophony of whispers, moans, and desperate pleas. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around us, pressing in, pleading for help, stating it hurt, begging us not to leave, to stay. I closed my eyes, swaying slightly. I wasn't just hearing them. I was feeling them. The raw agony, the lingering fear. A cold, skeletal hand seemed to brush against my cheek, and I gasped, opening my eyes to see nothing but empty air. The sanatorium was no longer just a building. It was alive, and it was watching us. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the old kitchen, previously ajar, slammed shut with a deafening clang that echoed through the sanatorium. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The remaining battery-powered lights, already flickering, died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. Only the faint, erratic glow of Anya's malfunctioning equipment provided any light. Liam's voice was strained, urging everyone to stay together, and asking Anya for light. Anya fumbled with her equipment, but it was unresponsive. The silence that followed the slam was even more terrifying than the noise. It was a suffocating, predatory silence, broken only by our ragged breathing and Noah's whimpers. It was then that Jonas, our quiet guide, finally broke his silence. His voice a low, guttural rumble that seemed to carry the weight of generations. "My great-grandmother. She was a nurse here," he began, his eyes fixed on the oppressive darkness. "She died here. They said it was the sickness, but the villagers, they spoke of something else. A legend, a malevolent presence that fed on despair. He spoke of the sanatorium not as a place of healing, but as a cage for the dying, where hope withered and fear flourished. He described a local belief that the collective suffering of the patients, especially those who succumbed to despair, created a powerful, lingering entity. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of pure, concentrated anguish. His words sent a fresh wave of dread through us, a cold realization that this was far more than just a haunted building. As Jonas spoke, my hand brushed against something hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the common room. It was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages brittle with age. The name on the cover sent a jolt through me. Nurse Elara Dubois. The same name from the audio recording. My hands trembled as I opened it, the faint scent of old paper and something metallic wafting from its pages. The entries were meticulous, detailing the daily routines, the patients, and then a slow, horrifying descent into madness. The nurse wrote of a silent ward, not for the physically ill, but for those whose spirits had broken, those who had given up. And then, the doctor. A brilliant but twisted man obsessed with the psychology of despair. He believed he could harness the energy of their fading life force, conducting cruel, unspeakable experiments. The entity, she wrote, was not a ghost, but a monstrous manifestation of this collective suffering, growing stronger with each broken soul. As I read, the words seemed to bleed from the page, seeping into my mind, painting a vivid, terrifying picture of the horrors that had transpired within these walls. The whispers around us grew louder, more distinct, no longer just pleas, but desperate cries for release. The entity, a formless, shadowy mass, began to coalesce in the oppressive darkness, its presence causing an intense, almost unbearable psychological distress. It was not a ghost. It was the very essence of despair, given form, and it was awakening. Just as the full horror of the nurse's diary settled upon us, a violent, unforeseen blizzard erupted outside, slamming into the sanatorium with a primal fury. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the ancient windows, and snow, thick and relentless, began to pile against the doors, trapping us within the decaying maw of the building. The entity, now fully awakened by our presence and the raw despair emanating from the diary, began its hunt. It was no longer subtle. It moved with a terrifying purpose, a formless shadow that seemed to stretch and contort, filling the corridors with an oppressive cold that seeped into our very bones. It used our own fears, our deepest regrets against us, twisting them into psychological torment. Liam, ever the thrill-seeker, his eyes still wide with the potential for viral footage, became reckless. He broke away from us, drawn by a flickering light down a darkened corridor, convinced it was the ultimate shot. We heard his frantic shouts, then a sickening thud, followed by a series of desperate, guttural gasps. When we found him, he was huddled in a corner of what looked like an old patient's room, his camera lying shattered beside him. His eyes were wide, vacant, staring at something only he could see. He was reliving it, the final moments of a desperate patient, trapped in a straitjacket, screaming into the void. He thrashed, whispering pleas for release, his body contorting as if bound by unseen restraints. The entity had found his weakness, the desire for control, the fear of being helpless. He was psychologically broken, a hollow shell echoing the despair of the sanatorium's forgotten souls. Anya, the pragmatist, the one who sought logical explanations, found her world crumbling. Her sophisticated equipment, usually her shield against the unknown, turned against her. The EMF meter shrieked. The thermal camera displayed grotesque, swirling faces, and her audio recorder played back a cacophony of distorted whispers. But these weren't just random sounds. They were the voices of her loved ones, twisted and mocking, accusing her of past failures, reminding her of every mistake, every regret. She clutched her head, screaming for them to stop, her face contorted in agony. The entity knew her fear, the fear of losing control, of being overwhelmed by chaos. She was tormented by auditory hallucinations, trapped in a sonic nightmare of her own making, unable to distinguish reality from the entity's cruel illusions. I tried to reach them, to pull them back from the brink, but the entity was too powerful, its presence suffocating. It was then that Jonas, his face grim but resolute, stepped forward. He had been quiet, observing, but now a fierce determination burned in his eyes. This place, it feeds on the forgotten, he rasped, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "My great-grandmother. She tried to fight it. There's an old way, a ritual to contain it." He spoke of a family secret, a desperate measure passed down through generations, a way to temporarily bind the entity, to draw its focus. He knew the sanatorium's history, not just from legends, but from the bloodline that tied him to this cursed place. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, a silent plea. "I will lead it away. You must escape. Tell our story. Let them know what truly happened here." He began to chant in an ancient dialect, his voice low and resonant, a stark contrast to the entity's chaotic whispers. The air around him shimmered, and the shadowy mass of the entity seemed to recoil. Then, with a terrifying surge, it lunged towards him, drawn by the raw energy of his defiance. Jonas, with a final desperate look, turned and ran deeper into the sanatorium, drawing the malevolent presence after him, sacrificing himself to buy me time, to ensure at least one of us would escape this living nightmare. The sounds of his struggle and the entity's triumphant roar slowly faded into the blizzard's howl, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence, clutching the nurse's diary like a lifeline. The escape was a blur, driven by a primal instinct for survival. I stumbled through the snow-choked corridors, the nurse's diary clutched tightly to my chest. The sanatorium, once a looming presence, now seemed to shrink behind me, its dark windows like vacant eyes watching my retreat. The blizzard, as if on cue, began to subside, leaving behind a world muffled in pristine white, a stark contrast to the darkness I had just fled. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of Jonas, his brave, desperate sacrifice, and the terrifying screams of Liam and Anya were seared into my mind. I was the sole survivor, carrying not just the diary, but the heavy burden of their fates. Months later, the world outside was a cacophony of noise and light, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the sanatorium. I was back in my soundproof studio, the familiar hum of my equipment, a comforting, yet now unsettling, presence. The final episode of Echoes of the Past was ready. My voice, though strained and haunted, narrated the horrifying events of that night, a testament to the unspeakable terrors we had faced. I played the audio recording I had captured during my desperate escape, the entity's chilling whispers, but this time, it was distinctly calling my name. And in the background, faint, distorted, almost imperceptible, was the voice of Jonas, now part of the chorus of trapped souls, a new echo in the silent ward. I finished the narration, my voice cracking on the last word. The silence in the studio was absolute, save for the faint hum of the equipment. I reached up, my hand trembling slightly, and took off my headphones. The world rushed back in, but it was different. The air felt colder, heavier. My eyes darted to the corner of the room, drawn by an inexplicable chill. Nothing, just shadows. I told myself it was exhaustion, the lingering trauma. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible cough echoed from the very corner I had just looked at. A dry, raspy sound, like something struggling for breath. My blood ran cold. My eyes widened, fixed on the empty space. The entity was no longer confined to the sanatorium. It had followed me. The cycle was not broken. It had just found a new host. The screen fades to black as we hear the distinct, chilling sound of a door slowly creaking open, followed by a faint, triumphant whisper that seems to fill the void. Join our growing YouTube family. Subscribe now and be part of every exciting moment. Ever had a similar encounter or strange moment? We'd be thrilled if you'd share it with us in the comments. Who knows, your story might be featured next.